Hello and welcome to this new episode of Continuum Gaming, and today we are going to have another look at another Sailfish OS related topic. Better to say it's about the new official smartphones for 2024, which we are of course in. And in the end we are going to have a look at these smartphones. You all know about that, the Jolla Community Smartphone, the C2 in the end, will be released or is promised to be released at the end of this month roundabout. So if it's 1 week later or whatever, it's fine for me. But in the end, promised to be released at the end of August. And we are at the start of August, of course, and so it's probably an interesting topic to talk about because, of course, you now have 3 different options to go with. We have the Sony Xperia 10 Mark IV, the Sony Xperia 10 Mark V, and of course the C2, which are all new smartphones, or at least pretty new smartphones, which will now support Sailfish OS in more or less the same way. There are a couple of different rumors about, for instance, the camera, which will not be available in some situation or some kind of part. Maybe, we don't know at the start when the Sony Xperia 4 support is started, more or less, but we will see. In the end, it's only about some update by Sony itself, which they have to provide, and after that it's going to be released anyway. So we are assuming that all of them are fully functional. I'm not sure about what's happening there, so we will see what's happening. Anyway, I am assuming, and this is very important too, I am assuming that the Community Smartphone 2 by Jolla is really the Reader S19 Max Pro S in this case. So it's very likely that it's like that, but it's an assumption, so be aware of that. If the assumption is wrong, then everything I say in this episode is more or less obsolete, but at the moment it really looks very much like that, and I will show you why I think that is the way. I can just go to the next part here, and if you have a look at this is of course Jolla's website itself, where they are telling us about the Community Smartphone C2. It's going to cost €299 in this case, euros, and of course here you can see it's done by Reader in this case. So Reader is a smartphone manufacturer. We already know about that. It's here, and they told us on the Jolla Community or to say the Love Day 2 they hold there, and in the end the Jolla information there where that Reader is going to provide the smartphone. It's here, so I'm pretty sure it's very wide. If I go down here, I can see all the different specs of the smartphone, and if I have a look at that, with the exception of the first one, of course, so Sailfish OS 5.0 is going to be on the smartphone, which is a very different one from Android and so on and so forth. And of course, all the different informations I can give you here are only for the Android version. So all the benchmarks and stuff like that I'm going to show you are for the Android version of all the different smartphones we're testing here, because it's just like that. We don't have the real versions of Sailfish OS running on the systems for now. So that's just how it is. So we are just going to talk about the hardware in this case. And what you can already see is we have 8 GB of RAM, we have 128 GB of storage with expandable microSD cards. We will have a dual SIM and a microSD slot, and this is a very interesting feature. I will talk later on about that more. One of the bummers of the smartphone is that it's only providing LTE+, so 4.5G, not the real 5G or something like that. But anyway, it's in general for most use cases very, very fine. Anyway, more important, we know that it has this resolution, which is a little bit low, but it's still there. We have this 1600 times 720 pixels, sorry, whatever I told you there. And that is the resolution of the smartphone, so we know about that. And of course all the other informations here are more or less the same. If I have a look now at Reader, so this is the Reader website. I translated it with Firefox in this case to English. So you will see a couple of different very strange things, like for instance, this is not euros, of course. This is Turkish lira or lira. Just ignore that. It's automatically translated to our web page, and of course there will be some kind of trouble in there with the names. But in the end, all the different other parts here should be right. And if I have a look at that, it's very much looking like the smartphone we saw before. And as you already can see here, we have 8 GB of RAM, we have 128 GB of memory, we have the right pixel density of the rear camera in this case, and we have of course the right screen size, and as mentioned before, it's looking very much like the one we see by Jolla. This is just what we are assuming. All the other options from Reader we can see on the website look a little bit different or have other specs or something. So it's very likely being this one, and of course there are different kinds of colors here. If I go If I go to the black version here, for instance, have a look at the back, it's very likely the one we already saw there, just with that Jolla had more or less the option to put their own logo on it and stuff like that. But anyway, and of course the price itself, you can see it now, it's Turkish lira, 10,500 Turkish lira, and if I translate that to euro, you can see it here, from 10,500 to euro, it's very close to the price of the Jolla Community Smartphone 2 by Jolla. So that's very likely the one we are going to get if you are buying this $299 version of Jolla, of course with pre-installed Sailfish OS on it, and the price is very, very fair like that. I think at least for the end consumer that's pretty much okay. So we already know about that, so that's my assumption. I think this is going to be the smartphone we are talking about, okay? And for this episode, I had to look at something, so here you can see them. I had to look at different kind of benchmarks and stuff like that to just compare the different smartphones. So which one should you get? It's not a very simple question, so it's a little bit hard to compare everything and so on and so forth, especially because the Sony Xperia ones are very mainstream, while the Reader one is pretty niche. So it's a little bit hard to get any kind of information, but I tried and found a couple of informations, and I'm just going to show you what I found, because I just did a small little sheet here, and as you hopefully can read on the sheet, we have a couple of different information. So I really got more or less all the current Sony Xperias. So this is the Sony Xperia 10 Mark II in this case, 10 Mark III, 10 Mark IV, 10 Mark V, and the new Reader S19 Max Pro S. And I just compared a couple of different informations here about all the different smartphones, and in the end, the more interesting stuff is more or less marked in some kind of a color. In general, if it's this rosé or pink one, it's not that good, and if it's a green part, for instance, it's a pretty good one. I will probably give you a link to this sheet if you want to have a look by yourself, but just take those numbers I found here with a little bit of a salt in the end, because in the end, I really had a hard time to find matching numbers and stuff like that. So in some situations, for instance, the Geekbench, the Geekbench 6 CPU test I found here, for instance, for more or less all of the smartphones. In some situations, it's maybe a slightly different versions and stuff like that. But Geekbench 6 is the one that pretty much is very close to what I expect. If you have a look at the Antutu scores here, or at the 3D Mark Slingshot Extreme scores, it's a lot different. So let's have a look at everything. Most important, of course, I will start with the Sony Xperia 10 Mark II. It has, of course, the lowest amount of RAM, So there we have a difference. We have, of course, a much older CPU in it, and of course the GPU and the CPU in a smartphone are comparable. So in general they are fixed to each other. It's an Adreno in Snapdragon version there, and with the Tiger, I'm not sure. I think it's a MediaTek chipset. I'm not sure what the name of the GPU is there, but in the end, all of them have a fixed GPU to them, so it's pretty easy to find out what they are going to do there. And in the end, all the different benchmarks, 3 I got here, should give you a couple of different informations. Okay, anyway, we have 3 to 4 gigabyte of RAM, so the 10 Mark II was assumingly available in those 2 informations. Same for the Xperia 10 Mark V in this case, so there's a 6 gigabyte version and the 8 gigabyte version of this smartphone. In general, I would say that the 6 gigabyte version is the one we are going to talk about, because that one is probably the one you are going to get, because the 8 gigabyte version is only available in certain markets, might not be supported directly by Jolla or Sailfish OS in the end. We don't know about that. It's probably more or less the same, but we just don't know. So we are going to assume it's going to be the 6 gigabyte version and so on and so forth. If you already have a 10 Mark III, for instance, you get a newer chipset. You have, of course, 6 GB of RAM and so on and so forth. The screen size is very comparable between all the different Sonys, and the Max Pro S, of course, has a different screen size, and it has a very different ratio, more or less. So as you already know, the Sony Xperias are more or less very slim but high in the height there, and tall. And for the reader, that's not the case. It's a little bit brighter, more wider in this axis, more or less. So if you don't like this compact form factor, or you have trouble with the keyboard, for instance, so typing in something, that might be a problem. Just to show you something about that, if I go in there, of course, you just have a lot less screen space like this with these kind of keyboard, more or less. So each and every of the keys here is a little bit smaller, a little bit tighter, more or less, together. And if you don't like that, have bigger fingers or something like that, that might be a problem. Then, for instance, the reader might be a better option. The reader has a screen size of 6.5 inches in this case. All the others are round about at 6, maybe 6.1, we are not sure. It's on the edge, I would say. It might even be the same, especially if I have a look at the screen resolutions, which are all the same for all the different Sony Xperia 10 since at least Mark II. And like that, you can see all of them are pretty close in pixel density too. So that's very, very likely the same too. You can already see that there is a newest mobile connection I wrote on here. So in the end we have 4G for the 10 Mark II, and starting with the 10 Mark III, for instance, we have 5G in there. Very important. The reader S19 Max Pro S can only do 4G. 4.5G, it depends what you want to call that, but in the end it's not a real 5G smartphone. So that is a bummer. You can also see that the screen resolution is very different from the Sony Xperia. So the Sony Xperias are a lot sharper. It's not bad, so 270 ppi is everything starting with 300 is totally fine. I would say this can be okay. Sorry, my laptop just got into sleeping mode. In the end, everything can be okay with 270 ppi too, I would say. It's not that crisp, of course, but it's fine. And one thing that is very important with that, even so you see a relatively small number here, for instance, for the Geekbench CPU and GPU parts, it's not that important when you are just going to put out less pixels in the end. So even so the smartphone has a little bit less of power in these benchmarks, you should at least put something on there or give it a little bit of a slack, because it's going to work less for average usage and stuff like that. So it might feel very snappy, even though it's not that fast by hardware standards. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, let's have a look at the different informations there. What we already can see, the new smartphone, we didn't know till now what it was, the Reader S19 Max Pro S in this case. Lands more or less between the Sony 2 and the Sony 3, in this case, the 10 Mark III or 10 Mark II, regarding all the different benchmarks tests. So let's say it's round about at the same speed and so on as the Sony Xperia 10 Mark III, because in the end, if you have a look at the multi-score here, that's pretty close together. The single core is a little bit lower, much lower in the end, but the multi-core is again fine for that, because this is an 8-core machine, this is a 6-core machine. So in the end, even though the single core is very low, the multi-core operations are pretty much in the same ballpark, at least, let's say it like that. If you, for instance, get the 4 or 5 of the Xperia 10s, then you are getting a lot better information or a lot better performance out of it. If it's going to make a big difference on Sailfish OS, we will see. I assume it will not. So it's a little bit faster probably, but in daily usage or something, you're not going to really notice that, I would say. Anyway, it's like that, so the hardware itself is more potent on those two, of course, maybe even on this one, but that depends. I would say it's comparable to the Sony Xperia 10 Mark III, right between there somewhere. Okay, so let's have a look. There are a couple of different, unusualities or whatever. It's an unusual behavior I saw there, because I didn't get all the same information from all the different sites about some of the benchmarks here. So I just wrote them here. It's a little bit different and a little bit hardcore. So if you have a look at the 3D Mark Slingshot Extreme, that's a benchmark, of course, regarding the smartphone's GPU in the end. As you already can see, the GPU here with 9074 in this case is more potent than the one from the Sony Xperia 10 Mark III. Those informations are from the same website, and I assume that, like that, the Reader is faster GPU-wise, but a little bit less fast CPU-wise. Anyway, interestingly enough, I found a couple of different informations about, for instance, the Sony Xperia 10 Mark IV, and I found a site in EM test, you can already see that down below here where I got this information, has 2,165 points. That's very odd, because why should that one be much slower than the Sony Xperia 10 Mark V in this case, or much faster, sorry, because it's more or less double the score than I found for the 10.5 in this case. So I think this is a wrong number, or something else was more or less performed there, maybe in a different version or something, I'm not sure. These by benchmarks.ul were the same, so in the end I would say those are numbers I can more or less trust, because there's a problem with this too. If I have a look at Sony Xperia 10 Mark II in this case, you can already see this one is faster than the successor of it. So in the end, the Sony Xperia 10 Mark II should be much faster than the 10 Mark III. Really? I'm not sure about that neither. So again, sorry for the timeout of the screen here. And in the end, you already can see there's a little bit of something going on, what I really don't like about this. So I just included the numbers here just to let you check it, but I'm not sure about that. Especially if you have a look at Antutu, for instance, provided by Kimovil. So all of these informations are by Kimovil, that's fine. Problem is I couldn't find them there by Reader. So the Reader information, or the Reader smartphone manufacturer, is not tested by Chemoville, but only the Sonys are. Those scale like you would just expect it. So this is more or less what I would say. So each and every version, or each and every revision of the smartphones or Mark versions, whatever, is just increasing. And that's fine. I think that could be the case. If I have a look at this, very unlikely somehow, I'm not sure. We will see. I would say this is probably the wrong one. And this is probably wrong too, or a different version of this 3D slingshot. Those two, so the 3, the 5 and the Pro S in this case, are probably the right way or comparable to each other. It makes sense that they are. Anyway, let's have a look at what I wrote here additional to that. So in the end, it's a comment here for the 2 and 3 and for the 4 are more or less the same, because you can only use the dual SIM or the single SIM slot with this, and if you want to use the micro SD card, in the end you will have to lose one of the SIM cards in this case. So it's a combi slot more or less, so you can more or less decide if you want a dual mode or dual SIM operations here, or if you want to have a single SIM and the micro SD card extension in there. That is something that the Reader S90 Max Pro S doesn't have to do, because it has a 3 trace slot, whatever. So in the end here you really can use all of them. So 2 SIM cards at the same time, and you can use the micro SD card all together. That's a fine little detail. I really like that about the smartphone, and that might be, for instance, another information you need to think about if you want the Reader S19 or some of the other smartphones here. Additional to that, of course, as mentioned before, the most important difference between those here is more or less that you have here a different screen ratio, so that might be a good, a reasonable reason to go with the Reader 2. Other than that, the Sony Xperia 10 Mark V in this case has no notification LED. That's a little bit of a tragic thing, because all the other versions before that have that, but this one loses this, so just be aware of that. I am not sure about the Reader S19 at the moment, if they have that or not. I would have to guess, and I don't want to guess in this case. So maybe I will write it down in the description box below if I can, or if I just can't find information on that, then we will have to wait till the smartphone arrives. Yeah, and this is more or less information I can give you here. So in the end, all the information you can see here, I have a couple of different references for that, where I looked for all these different numbers. And of course you can see here, we have used Benchmark's UL GPU test, which is this version, the OpenGL ES 3.1 in this case, to work with this. Maybe, for instance, this could be a Vulkan or a Mantle score, I'm not sure. All the other ones are OpenGL. Maybe that is a problem with this, why this is so out of the box or very far off. Maybe that's the reason, I'm not sure. They didn't tell me, because this was of course by EM test, because the information of the Sony Xperia 10 or Mark IV are not available on benchmark.ul at the moment. So sorry for all that, but I can't tell you more precisely what's going on there. Yeah, and other than that, I would say this is more or less what I can tell you about these smartphones at the moment. I hope you had fun and learned something new. If it was like that, please give it a thumbs up, of course. If you have any kind of questions, comments, whatever, put them down below in the commentary section, we can discuss there. And other than that, thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you didn't. And other than that, thank you for watching. See you around, and bye. Bye.